Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining the Foreign Press Center's hybrid press briefing. I am Kodama Kazuo, President of the Foreign Press Center Japan, and I will be the moderator of today's press briefing. It is our great pleasure to welcome today Mr. SHIKATA Noriyuki, Cabinet Secretary for Public Affairs, Prime Minister's Office of Japan, as a briefer on the priority policies of the Kishida administration. I would also like to tell you that it is quite fortunate to have Mr. SHIKATA, one of the most senior press officials under current administration and working most closely with Prime Minister Kishida. The last in-person press briefing of our center was February the 25th, 2020, more than 2 years ago. So therefore, I am extremely happy indeed to resume today's in-person and online press briefing. Now, Mr. SHIKATA will speak for roughly 20 minutes, followed by a 30-minute Q&A session. There will be a time for networking for the press who are present here from here in this room. Questions will be accepted from foreign media. Those attending the briefing online, please send us your questions from Q&A function or press the raise your hand button, both at the bottom of the screen. You may post your question in the Q&A section at any time after the briefing starts. To those of you who are here, please make sure your cell phones are in silent mode. Without any further ado, Mr. SHIKATA, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Kodama. It's a great pleasure to be back to Foreign Press Center Japan. Today, as was explained earlier, I wish to explain major priority policy agendas of the Kishida administration and making use of PowerPoints I have prepared, starting with 3 key agenda items of the Kishida administration, which consist of the diplomatic agenda items. In Japanese, it's called the realism diplomacy for a new era. And I'll touch upon Russian invasion of Ukraine and more broadly, the Prime Minister Kishida's diplomatic agenda items. And number 2, I will touch upon very briefly about the COVID-19 related matters. And the third pillar is economic policy. So I'll just start with Japan's view and stance on Russia's unlawful invasion of Ukraine. Of course, as a fundamental position that the Japanese government has made clear is that our view is that Russian invasion of Ukraine is a violation of international law, and it is against the pursuit of rule-based international order, and this is an unjustified and unprovoked act of aggression by Russia against Ukraine. And as many of you probably know, Japan has been supporting international criminal courts for the investigations and contributing financially to the investigation of international criminal court. Japan is in fact the largest contributor to the ICC. Japan has made clear that we condemn this act, and we have been very closely collaborating with other G7 members in solidarity with Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. And the second point is, although this invasion is taking place in Europe, our view is that this is indeed a global issue, and it's not the issue limited to the European security landscape. And we are of the view, that the Russian invasion of Ukraine affects not only European security landscape, but also Indo-Pacific situation or East Asian security landscape. And from our viewpoint, Japan is committed, to defending universal values such as the human rights, the rule of law. So from this perspective, we have been implementing a series of sanctions against Russia. And the PowerPoint, there's attachments for those people who are interested in the details of Japanese measures. Those measures are attached to this material. We are imposing sanctions not only against Russia, but also against Belarus as well. At the same time, we have been supporting Ukraine. Japan has been coming up with more additional support for Ukraine and Ukrainian people in terms of providing supplies, humanitarian assistance, financial assistance, among others. And Prime Minister Kishida has been taking initiative to accept, more evacuees from Ukraine. The Japanese government has publicly made clear that we wish to accept more evacuees from Ukraine. And in collaboration with the private sector or educational institutions, there are, more Ukrainian people arriving in this country. And we appreciate the initiatives, coming from, for example, Japanese universities, to accept, to receive more Ukrainian people. Okay.
Next.
Okay. So next one is page 4. So I guess many of you would be, interested in what's going to happen at the Quad, leaders meeting next Tuesday. The meeting itself is going to be held at the Prime Minister's office. And we are looking forward to receiving the leaders from Australia, India, and the United States to be hosted by Prime Minister Kishida. From our viewpoint, the Quad leaders meeting is part of our efforts to promote free and open Indo-Pacific. And this is a vital venue for us to discuss how we could strengthen the free and open international order based on the rule of law. And we have been promoting practical cooperation in such fields as health security, including production of vaccines, for example, in India, with the support coming from Japan or the United States and Australia. There has been discussion of collaboration in infrastructure. Japan has been advocating quality infrastructure, and as well as collaboration in terms of supply chains, especially surrounding critical and emerging technologies. There is broader areas of cooperation, such as in the context of climate change, including promoting renewable energy in respective Quad countries and beyond. Naturally, we expect that there will be a very candid discussion on international and regional situations, including Russian invasion of Ukraine, or, for example, as we see more active North Korean military activities, including missile launch and the possibility of nuclear testing, such regional issues as North Korea would also be taken up. So you can see some of the developments of Quad leaders and foreign ministers meeting. Japan has been advocating this Quad cooperation, and over years, especially during the last 3 years, we have been seeing the first foreign ministers meeting held in 2019, and the first the meeting, the first Quad leaders physical meeting was taking place in September of last year. So we are really delighted, to see that the Quad summit is taking place in Tokyo. Next, page 5, G7 leaders statement. This is a quotation of some of discussions surrounding the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and Japan is on board embracing the G7 leaders' statements, as is quoted in these slides coming from May 8 and April 7. Next slide is just for your information. There has been discussion of how we could step up our sanctions against Russia, and as you are aware, Japan's energy policy landscape is quite challenging. Of course, given what happened in Fukushima in 2011, what we call the 311 in 2011, many of our civil nuclear reactors have been stopped, and we have been resuming some of reactors, based on maximum, safety evaluations. At the same time, as you can see in this data, we import nearly 90% of crude oil from the Middle East, and the Japanese government has tried to diversify energy supplies from the Middle East, especially in the context of oil. So we have energy imports from Russia, as you see in this data. So now, in the context of G7 discussion, we have been discussing how we could reduce our energy dependency upon Russia, given what's been happening. And you see the data from energy importing countries of G7 members, which means UK, Italy, Germany, and France. And so each of those G7 members face quite challenging situations in terms of energy mix and energy policy. Next, on page 7, I just go back to the basic views of Prime Minister Kishida's diplomatic policy. He emphasizes universal values, including democracy, the rule of law, basic human rights, and he had appointed a special advisor dedicated to the human rights issues for former Defense Minister Mr. Nakatani Gen. Naturally, as we discussed the North Korea-related issues, not only nuclear and missile-related matters, abduction issues remains the priority issues, and promoting FOIP is a very important agenda item. So next slide, page 8, is actually initial illustration of FOIP. You know, when then Prime Minister Abe attended a TICAD meeting. I recall it was 2016. So when we talk about free and open Indo-Pacific, we are talking about two oceans, India Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. So geographical kind of scale actually covers Africa as well, from our viewpoint, and also South Pacific, you know, island nations, for example. So we wish to promote the FOIP in the context of free and open and rule-based, you know, promoting rule-based international order, as well as promoting economic connectivity. Next, please. So we have been engaging with our partners, like-minded partners, and of course we have been engaging very closely with the United States, our alliance partner. But you can see that Prime Minister Kishida has been reaching out to other leaders. For example, just earlier this month, Mr. Kishida was talking with Prime Minister Johnson. They are buddies from their foreign ministers' days. And we see more European countries, including Germany, Italy, France, being more interested in engaging with this FOIP, and as well as the EU as an institution. So this is the kind of conversation that has been taking place during the last few or several weeks, as you are aware. When PM Kishida visited Southeast Asian countries, including during the most recent trip of him to Southeast Asia, to Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand, we have discussed these issues, and of course, Quad-related discussions also included this. Next, please. So this diplomatic agenda items includes economic dimensions. Japan has been very active in reviving TPP. Once President Trump decided to leave TPP, Japan has been instrumental in realizing TPP as TPP-11, and we call it CPTPP. We still hope that the United States will come back, and Prime Minister Kishida has conveyed this message to President Biden already, but I expect that this issue could be taken up on Monday. Of course, at the same time, Prime Minister Kishida has indicated his support for this emerging US-led initiative called IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. So we are of the view, that Japan welcomes the US keen interest in engaging itself in the form of Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. And we understand that this issue was taken up when President Biden hosted US-ASEAN summit in Washington, D.C. And I expect that there will be discussion and progress on this issue of IPEF in Tokyo, most likely on Monday. Japan has been pursuing different FTAs, so-called mega FTAs, which include RCEP. RCEP initially started negotiation among 16 countries, ASEAN plus 3, meaning Japan, China, ROK, plus 3, meaning Australia, New Zealand, and India. And toward the end of negotiation, India dropped out. So participating countries is 15 countries. So ASEAN plus 5, and Japan, EU, EPA. So in terms of the order of negotiation, we were negotiating TPP first, followed by Japan, EU, EPA, and in terms of the timing of conclusion of the negotiation, RCEP was the last one. Of course, 2 years ago we were negotiating Japan, UK EPA because of Brexit, so because of Brexit, we have a new Japan UK EPA, which includes some of the cutting edge provisions which did not exist in Japan EU EPA. And regarding CPTPP, there has been ongoing negotiation with the UK, and this issue has been taken up during Prime Minister Kishida's trip to London meeting with Prime Minister Johnson. Next, please. Prime Minister Kishida has been pursuing the idea of the world free of nuclear weapons. He is a politician having roots in Hiroshima. And as you see in the photo, when President Obama came to Hiroshima, he was explaining to President Obama regarding Hiroshima Peace Memorial. And so this is so-called life work of Prime Minister Kishida in terms as the politician. He has been keenly interested in pursuing this agenda. But in order to pursue this agenda, from his viewpoint, he needs to establish a good, the trust with President Biden, and of course, we cannot undermine our defense policy centering around Japan-US security alliance. In terms of global challenges, I'll touch upon climate change issues later, but poverty reductions or Africa-related matters is very important for us. So in the end of August, we have been discussing with our African partners in terms of realizing TCAT 8 to discuss the African development issues. Over years, I should note that this context or content of the discussion has been evolving, and we are increasingly discussing issues like private sector investment, sustainable development. So there was more focus on poverty reductions, but some of African countries are taking off, and the Japanese companies are also interested in investments in Africa because African continent is a very promising continent in the context of future economic development. And next, in the context of defense-related issues, PM Kishida has mentioned that toward the end of the year, the government will come up with a new national security strategy, national defense program guidelines, and midterm defense program. And as you see, not only North Korea-related matters or the security landscape in East China Sea, South China Sea, we are facing real challenging situations as I mentioned in the context of Russian invasion of Ukraine. So in terms of pursuing our security policy, it is essential for us to further deepen Japan-US alliance. And this means that our view, Prime Minister Kishida's view, is that Japan needs to significantly strengthen Japan's defense capabilities. And we are engaging with other security partners, including Australia, UK, or India, or promoting collaboration with some of the Southeast Asian countries in terms of supporting their maritime enforcement capabilities, among others. So next slide, page 13, is a kind of illustrations of how East Asian or Indo-Pacific security landscape is challenging, and you see in terms of the military capabilities, the North Korea, China, Russia are the major military powers in the region. And large-scale military capabilities are concentrated surrounding Japan from our viewpoint. And next is more focused on the East Asian security landscape. You see a military balance. This is the source is Defense of Japan from our MOD, and you see increasing military spending, for example, in China, with a lack of transparency in increasing military spending. And we have been attentive to the issues of expanding and intensifying maritime activities by China in East China Sea and South China Sea and Western Pacific. And next slide is China's recent air and maritime activities in East China Sea. It's a more of a close-up in terms of what's happening. And you are aware, some of the deployment of aircraft carrier Liaoning in the vicinities of Okinawa in recent weeks. There have been exercise in terms of their fighter jets on board the Chinese aircraft carrier. Let me move on to COVID-19 issues. I would make the case that Japan's response to COVID-19 at the end of the day has been probably, it depends on how you describe it, but in terms of international comparison, especially in the context of the number of deaths or number of infection, Japan has been doing pretty well among OECD countries. And we have been promoting booster shots. Now, the third vaccination ratio is 57%. So I think we are among the kind of average of G7 members. As you're aware, we have been promoting, this 3 C's. There has been some discussions about, how long we should, wear masks, and there have been, a new kind of guidelines, especially toward the summer, and especially as related to the children who are wearing masks and under the hot, summer season arriving in Japan. So I guess you would be interested in this issue of how we would move on in terms of entry restrictions into Japan. Prime Minister Kishida mentioned in London that the Japanese government will relax its entry restrictions next month, taking into account, the measures taken in the other G7 countries. Next, on economic policy, third pillar, PM Kishida has been coming up with the concept of new form of capitalism, and this concept includes the view that there are problems, challenges, facing capitalism in terms of 3 major areas: income disparities between the center and the regional areas, and number 3 is climate change challenges. And you could regard this as sustainable capitalism, and also the reason why he's making this case is to keep democracy robust and to protect democracy against autocracy or authoritarian states. So unless we upgrade our capitalism, addressing those 3 disparities, 2 disparities and climate change related matters, we will be facing further challenges. So from Mr. Kishida's point of view, President Biden's Build Back Better has lots of commonalities with a new form of capitalism, and we understand that in the EU there is similar discussion taking place. Next, please. So the vision is sustainable capitalism, and Prime Minister Kishida wishes to collaborate with other like-minded countries especially in the Indo-Pacific region, but it could go beyond. As I mentioned, EU is coming up with a very ambitious agenda, especially in the context of climate change. And so we are very open about international collaboration. And domestically, he has been making the case that he wishes to realize a virtual cycle of growth and distribution. And this means these challenges, for example, climate change challenges, could be transformed into the new growth areas for the Japanese economy. And of course, for that to happen, we need to invest in people, and and Japanese economy needs to realize more labor mobility to the growth areas. So it is essential that our workers would be better trained, or based on recurrent education. For example, our labor force could be shifting to moving into new growth areas. And next, page 19, this is some of the messages, quotes from his Davos agenda speech or Guildhall in London earlier this month. So he's been making the case of the great transformation of liberal democratic society. And naturally, Davos has been discussing stakeholder capitalism, and there have been the common agenda, we believe, with the some of discussion that has been taking place at Davos. And as is quoted in this Guildhall speech, the climate change issue is something which is closely related to the economic externalities, and he's attentive, to the pressing challenges that are posed by authoritarian states. So there would be naturally economic statecraft or economic security discussion that is closely associated with this agenda item. Next, one of the pillar of the new capitalism is a digital garden city nation. Garden city idea emerged, as I understand, in London in 1897, and in Japanese it's translated into Den Toshi. And for those who speak Japanese, when you hear Den Toshi, there's a line called Den Toshisen, and there is a residential area called Den Choku, rich residential area in the suburbs of Tokyo. This was a project that was started after 1910, when this garden city idea arrived in Japan. But garden city idea was again discussed in Japan during Prime Minister Ohira's days, a little over 40 years ago. After rapid industrial development in Japan in the 70s, there was attempt, to realize, the kind of a harmonization with nature or garden, and So in today's context, Prime Minister Ohira passed away, during his tenure as Prime Minister, and Prime Minister Ohira is somebody whom Prime Minister Kishida succeeded in terms of his political faction. And so in today's context, it's called Digital Garden City, making use of digital technologies, especially in the context of addressing challenges facing local regions. And he is trying to carry out regulatory reform agenda in terms of reviewing 40,000 regulations, laws and regulations according to newly established digital principles. So it's a kind of quiet process, but the centering around the digital agency, newly established digital agency, there are 40,000 laws and regulations being reviewed at this point of time. Next slide is some of the examples. If we could realize the turnaround in solving social issues as a growth strategy, and as we are starting to see in Japan, the population of Tokyo is starting to decline, and the younger generation of Japanese want to move out from Tokyo and engage in telework or workation. And some of the headquarters of the companies, for example, Persona is moving from Tokyo to Awajishima in Hyogo. So this is something which could lead to more sustainable development as a nation. And next slide includes some of the cases in the countryside in Japan, including workation in Hakone, Lake Ashino, or making use of some of big data for managing some of the social challenges, or making use of drones, among others. Next is digital infrastructure. So Mr. Kishida's case is that the central government will be responsible for investment in digital infrastructure. So 5G or beyond 5G, data centers, and the government is aware of the need, for promoting regulatory reform to realize, the full use of digital technologies, including the automated delivery services, among others, and also we need to train, more digital experts across the nation. So we are targeting at nurturing digital experts in the order of 2.3 million during the next 4 years. Next is the climate change issues. As I mentioned, energy policy landscape in Japan is quite challenging, and we wish to make use of all the available technologies, including, for example, hydrogen or ammonia, to realize decarbonization. And we are keen to support other Asian countries' transition to zero emissions. So this is the kind of issues that Prime Minister Kishida has been discussing with Southeast Asian leaders or Prime Minister Modi when he visited India, and he is advocating Asia zero emissions community. And next slide is the Japan's targets, quite challenging, especially in the context of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 46% in 2030 and net zero emissions, carbon neutral by 2050. And next slide is some of PM Kishida's quotes, including when he went to COP26, and more recently in the context of Asia Energy Transition Initiative, where we are trying to support, for example, individual Southeast Asian countries to realize energy transitions. And each country's energy policy landscape or existing energy mix is different. So each country needs a kind of roadmap for such energy transition. So next slide indicates, some of the pillars of Asia Energy Transition Initiative, AETI, and so some of initiatives, that Japan has been taking in promoting this agenda. And next slide is economic security. I briefly mentioned economic security or economic statecraft. And as you are aware, this government has submitted economic security bills. So we are moving on to the stage of actually implementing the new economic security laws to be implemented in due course. And this is prompted, by our awareness of weaknesses in Japan's supply chain, especially during COVID days. We got the wake-up call in terms of our dependence on imported masks or medical equipment, among others. And of course, looking at the US-China frictions, and more recently, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we are reminded of the need for us to strengthen our economic security. So this could be included in this new form of capitalism. And next week's Quad Summit could discuss some of these issues in the context of supply chain resilience and vaccines, medicines, semiconductors, and other strategic technologies. So next slide just refers to some of the policy pillars of economic security. Mr. Kishida's new capitalism includes Japan's policy measures to promote in this country AI, quantum computing, or biotechnology, or semiconductors, among others. And next is outline of the Economic Security Act, which I mentioned earlier, in terms of stable supply of critical goods, core infrastructure services, cutting-edge key technologies, and non-disclosure system for patent applications. So those are the four major items. And next slide refers to some of the content of the pillars. And then let's briefly, let me touch upon science and technology related matters. Prime Minister Kishida is trying to implement 10 trillion yen university funds. We at this stage receiving the requests, from some of the universities in Japan, the applications for this fund. Mr. Kishida is intending to encourage startups coming from universities or coming up with a 5-year plan for generating startups. So when he says, second corporate startup period, he's talking about, post-war startup companies like Sony and others. And distribution strategy, very briefly, I mentioned investments in people, and he has been making the case for increasing wages for the workers that would be turned into the consumption and more growth for the economy. And when we talk about investments, investing in people, vocational training, especially in areas like digital technologies, and there is the discussion to come up with system to disclose non-financial information such as corporate human investment. So there could be encouragement for the companies to do more in this area. So as I mentioned earlier, the last three pages include more detailed description of Japan's support for the people of Ukraine, as well as the economic and financial sanction measures against Russia and Belarus. So I stop here. Thank you very much. Sorry, I kept on.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Shikata-san. Now the Q&A session will start. Questions will be accepted from foreign media journalists. To those of you who are joining this press briefing from this conference room, will be given a priority to ask a question. Please come up to the microphone when you are chosen by me, the moderator, and mention your name and affiliation before asking your question. Now also to the online audience, journalists, if you have a question, please press the raise your hand button on the screen or write it in the Q&A session. And when your name is called by me, please make sure that the microphone is unmuted, and please mention your name and affiliation before asking your question. So now the floor is open. Any questions from first? Yes, please. Come to the microphone.
Thank you. My name is Patrick Walter with Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. I have two questions, please. When you talked about the IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, if Japan is going to join IPEF, isn't that devalue the CPTPP because you have two competing frameworks then in Asia? And related to that, how does IPEF is related to the Quad? Is this a part of the Quad? Are the Quad members joining? Are you going to discuss it in the Quad or not? And the second question is, with the new president in South Korea, there is growing interest of South Korea to join the Quad. Is Japan in favor of an enlargement of the Quad? And would you be in favor of South Korea joining the Quad? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your questions. Of course, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is something the US has been proposing, and we have been informed of the US intention to some extent. But still, it's at the stage of the kind of, after launch of IPEF, there would be more detailed, discussion or consultations or possibly negotiations. And our understanding is that IPEF and TPP are different. So my understanding is IPEF is probably not traditional FTA, which may, traditional FTAs include market access related matters, tariff reductions or eliminations with scheduling, for example. So this is, at this point of time, not likely to be these central, parts of IPEF. Of course, these days the Japan's EPA includes many kind of new agenda items, such as digital trade. So, for example, Japan during the Trump days, Trump administration, we concluded two trade agreements with the United States. One is Japan-US trade agreement. Another one is Japan-US digital trade agreement. So there could be, areas, where we could be discussing, some of the trade agreements which we have concluded in the past, but probably, what is likely to happen is it's different, from traditional free trade agreements. And of course, there are issues like, supply chain related matters, that are emerging. And so economic security related discussions and so forth. So we are hoping, that this IPEF would lead to, number one, more proactive engagement of the United States in the Indo-Pacific economic order or economic architecture. And also, as I mentioned, Japan still wishes to see the US coming back to TPP. The reason why we say so is that TPP and IPEF are different. There may be some overlaps, but they are different, trades or different agreements. So in that sense, we don't think, that, for example, Japan coming on board with IPEF would decrease the significance of our expectation toward the United States to return to TPP. On the issue of Quads, this is something, as I mentioned, IPEF is something which is proposed by the US government, and we are supportive. But is it going to be discussed in the context of the Quad or not? This is probably, Quad has a broad agenda items. So, for example, if President Biden wishes to talk about IPEF, of course, that's probably, okay. But at this point of time, I'm not aware, that the, in the context of Quad agenda items, there could be, say, a new agreement or something, as related to IPEF. On the issue of ROK, as I explained at the outset, we have been, managing the evolutions of the Quad, and we have started, this discussion of this kind of ideas, I guess 2005 or 2006, and you could search Quad 2022 Tokyo, and you'll reach the website of our Prime Minister's office, and we have listed some of historical evolutions of the Quad, and so Quad means 4 countries, right? And we don't have any plan, to change that name. And I guess, AUKUS, is Australia, UK, and the US, right? And so So at this point of time, we are, I think, focused on promoting cooperation, practical cooperation among Quad members.
Thank you. And now I have actually recognized the Richard Lloyd Parley Richards of the Times would like to ask a question. And then also I have received Ms. Nishimura Karin, Radio France submitted her question. And then also I have recognized Reuters, James Swift, also would like to ask a question. So, okay, after Richard's question, and I'll ask you from K. Richard, you have the floor. Please, yes, ask your question.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah,
yes.
Good. Thank you very much for the chance to ask a question, and thank you for talking to us, SHIKATA-san. You said that one of the goals of Prime Minister Kishida's foreign policy is to protect democracy against autocracy and authoritarian states. And you've made it clear that democracy and human rights are at the heart of this policy. But at the same time, you describe the government of Vietnam as a key partner in the realization of a free and open Indo-Pacific. Now, as you know, the government of Vietnam suppresses democratic rights and imprisons its citizens for the expression of peaceful political opposition. How can you possibly embrace such a partner in a movement devoted to democracy and human rights? Thank you.
As you are aware, Japan and Vietnam maintains a very close partnership between ourselves. And from our viewpoint, Vietnam is a very, very important partner. And there are many common interests between us. And there's a very strong economic ties as well. Of course, we, as I mentioned at the outset, we are attentive, to human rights or democracy or the rule of law. At the same time, we need to be realistic, about the democratic evolutions of some of the states. And so our viewpoint is we wish to, for example, support institutional capacity of, for example, developing countries, and realize in many cases, gradual evolutions of the respective systems. So, for example, as you're aware, Vietnam is a member of TPP. And when Vietnam joins TPP, there are many obligations, which include transparency or accountability related matters. So we think that, engaging with Vietnam in this manner is productive. And I guess if you just focus on some of the issues that you mentioned, we may not realize the most productive and constructive partnership. Thank you.
Thank you. You have the floor, please.
SHIKATA-san, arigatou gozaimashita. I'm Floriano with Radio Senado from Brazil. I have two quick questions also. The first one regarding this map you showed about the incursions of China and the Japanese territorial sea. Does the government here see those as warnings, and how do they relate with the Taiwan's question? Also, you mentioned Build Back, the US Build Back Better, and the European program. How does, from the Japanese perspective, how do you see them compared to the Chinese BRI in terms of global effectiveness? And also, if I can add, President Biden is coming to Japan pretty soon. What kind of concrete results do you expect from that visit? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. As for your first question, I guess you are referring to page 15, China's recent air and maritime activities in East China Sea. And when you look at this map, this has a lot to do with Senkaku Islands. So we observe intrusion into the territorial waters or contiguous waters of Senkaku Islands. It's taking place every month or every week, in a sense, and so this is more related to Senkaku Islands, but of course Senkaku Islands are very closely situated with Taiwan. So there could be different interpretations about China's intention to expand their areas of activities. And as we observe these kind of attempts, to change the status quo have been taking place, both in the context of, East China Sea and South China Sea. So if we look at, this way, it's not only related to, Taiwan. The second point about the Build Back Better and Belt and Roads initiative, we think that the kind of discussion that would be taking place next Tuesday in the context of Quad, I mentioned there will be discussion of infrastructure related matters. Japan has been promoting under the context of under the vision of FOIP. We have been trying to promote connectivity in many parts of the Indo-Pacific, including ASEAN, between the Mekong region and the rest of Southeast Asia, or inside India, connectivity projects, including Shinkansen. So Prime Minister Modi, has been very supportive, has been very eager to introduce Shinkansen or high-speed rail projects in India. So, of course, this is our case for high-quality infrastructure, which involves connectivity across borders. Of course, Belt and Road Initiative also is, in many cases, overseas projects promoted by China. We have been making the case that those projects needs to meet 4 criteria. Number 1, economic viability. Number 2, fiscal sustainability. Number 3, transparency. And number 4, economic efficiency, something like that. So there are some standards of openness and transparency, economic viability, and fiscal sustainability. That's I should put it this way. So this is something which we observed in some of BRI projects, and probably most commonly identified ones is some of the island projects, for example, in South Asia. And so, of course, the United States is now more proactive in coming up with its own infrastructure support program with reform of U.S. broader aid agency. I guess there is more of the US infrastructure-related funding, which is made possible, during the last several years. And Australia is also becoming more proactive from this perspective. So, as I mentioned, for example, in Asia, there is a huge demand for infrastructure investment, but we wish to realize sustainable projects, which pays due attention to, say, achieving carbon neutral, eventually. So we need to ask, in many cases, as related to BRI, do those projects meet such standards or not? And number 3 was, what was it? But okay, what is the concrete? So of course, last time President Biden came to Japan was in 2013 as a vice president. So it's been, nearly 10 years. And so Mr. Kishida wishes to confirm, the importance of US-Japan alliance as a cornerstone of Japan's diplomatic and security policy. And we wish to deepen our alliance, not only for bilateral relations, but also for the Indo-Pacific region and the broader international peace and prosperity. And of course, given what's been happening due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there will be discussion about, how we would respond to the emerging act of violence and brutality. And more broadly, there will be discussion of how we could realize, free and open in the Pacific in concrete terms, and what the US and Japan can do together. So there will be discussion of, national security issues, regional, issues, including Ukraine and North Korea, or East Asian security landscape, as I explained, economic related matters, including IPEF, and more global issues, including climate change, among others. So there are lots of, issues for us to discuss, and we are looking forward to generating, more concrete projects of cooperation, including, for example, the space-related matters.
Shikata-san, are you prepared to accept a few more questions?
Yeah,
okay,
sure,
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Now, I actually read out a question from a Radio France's Karin Nishimura. In a nutshell, she's asking about the border measures. I read out her question. Don't you think the way it is done and the strong control on foreigners coming into Japan tend to make Japanese people think that foreigners are dangerous people who bring viruses in Japan when foreign tourists will be fully allowed to enter Japan? Full stop.
Oh, okay. So as I mentioned in the opening remarks, Prime Minister Kishida has an intention of relaxing border measures. At the same time, it's going to be step-by-step, staged approach, taking into account what's happening in other countries. So he has already mentioned, that Japan will, open up our borders, and he has also mentioned that, he wants to come up with the kind of experimental, measures. As you know, now we are receiving the business trips or receiving exchange students, among others. But of course, inbound tourism, the welcoming tourists is the next, big interest. And so in order to realize the sustainably receiving international tourists to Japan, the government is taking steps to welcome those international tourists to Japan. So hopefully there will be a day, when you'll be glad, to see what we are doing.
Thank you, Shikata-san. Now, I would ask Reuters, James Swift. Are you listening? James, you have the floor, please. Hi. Reuters, James Swift. Okay. Well, actually, he has already also submitted the question in writing. Okay, I read it out. The more about also border policy. Tourism was previously a major push for the Japanese government, particularly in the run-up to the Olympics. We now hear Japan has decided to start experimental tourism this month, as you mentioned, and increase overall inbound visitors to 20,000 next month. That's still well below the around 90,000 in 2019. What is the response to tourism and travel industry voices who say that they desperately need action on this issue?
So I'm aware of the Japanese reports, as you mentioned, and Prime Minister Kishida has already mentioned that he wants to come up with a kind of experimental project for inbound tourism, and it is true, that we may not, open up the kind of restrictions in terms of daily kind of quota of arrivals, but and as you mentioned, there are voices from tourism industry in this country to receive more international tourists. And at the same time, we need to come up with a sound, health policy, and we have just overcome, I guess, a sixth wave. But we are attentive to some of the regions in Japan, including Okinawa, where there has been rising cases. So this is the kind of balance between what's happening in some parts of the country, and whether we would be receiving, say, more international tourists where we are seeing rising cases. So at the end of the day, we need to protect the health of the people, and there needs to be a kind of balance to be taken into account.
Thank you. Anyone from this room, please?
Mariam Gucci from AP. Thank you for the opportunity today. And I have two quick questions. What other members are you expecting for IPEF, as well as what kind of role does Japan hopes to play in that group? And my other question is, China has been criticizing these kind of groupings, including the Quad. So I'm wondering how do you think this meetings and new formation of this IPEF thing, as well as holding Quad, would affect Japan's relationship with China? Thank you.
Regarding other participants in IPEF, we are not really in a position to explain, and probably the U.S. government would be in a position to explain to you better. But we are aware, that the U.S. government has been trying to engage the countries in the region, including ASEAN members, and I guess that some of or many of existing TPP members. So we will see. We may hear more about the current, status of IPEF, I guess, next Monday. And number two, regarding groupings, as I explained in terms of free and open Indo-Pacific, our idea is we wish to make our initiative open and as much kind of transparent as possible. So it's not the grouping which is going to be united, against one enemy or things like that. So we wish to promote the principles, universal values such as democracy or human rights and others. And in the context of Japan, China relations, we are willing to engage Chinese counterparts. I guess most recently, Foreign Minister Hayashi engaged with his counterpart in Beijing. So there could be discussions of the issues of the concerns. We have concerns, as we see in the context of East China Sea or South China Sea. But at the same time, there are many Japanese companies investing in China, and we wish to address, some of the concerns, for example, of business operations in China, Japanese business operations in China, including in recent weeks or months, what we hear from a place like Shanghai.
Thank you. You have a question? Okay, please.
Hi, Nancy Snow, Nikkei Asia. I have a question if Prime Minister Kishida is still committed to this convening a meeting about ridding the world of nuclear weapons, which was mentioned as part of his realism diplomacy in his speech from January. Of course, that was a month before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it's clear that Japan's plate is very full now. So I was wanting you to address that. The second question is about TCAD. TCAD began on the heels of the immediate post-Cold War era, and it seems to be TCAD 8 standing on the toes of a possible new Cold War. So what is the hoped for outcome of TCAD 8 in Tunisia at the end of August? Thank you.
Regarding this, agenda of a world, free from nuclear weapons, this is a priority issue that Prime Minister Kishida attaches, much importance to. And when we see the reports about, North Korea's possible nuclear testing, or Mr. Putin, talking about the possibility of the use of nuclear weapons, this is really, bad situation. So in order to prevent possible use of nuclear weapons, we are reminded of the need for us to address, this issue. And so my take is Prime Minister Kishida is really, committed, to addressing issues. He wrote a book on this subject. So this is something, he wishes to pursue as a, as a politician or as a prime minister. And, and this is a kind of issue that as the relationship, between Prime Minister Kishida and President Biden deepens, there could be more in-depth discussion of how Japan and the United States, could collaborate to address, these issues. For Prime Minister Kishida, I think, the first person that he probably wishes to engage in discussion is probably President Biden at this point in time. And second point about TCAD is, for example, there's a renewed significance of TCAD H, and which I'm sure will be discussed in late August in Tunisia, which is the issues like food securities. As you know, Ukraine and Russia are food, exporters, especially wheat, grains, and we hear reports about the food security issues emerging in many of African countries. So how we could address these emerging issues. I talked about private sector investment. That's for sure, but at the same time, there are existential critical agenda items, that are emerging, and we need to be, united in supporting, some of those countries in need, and this is something which has been taken up in the context of G7 process as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, time has already run out of the scheduled time, but just two more questions, then we'll finish this press briefing. Shikata-san, actually, from Radio France, Karin Nishimura, she asked also another question on growth strategy. I just read out her question. Japanese government seems to always focus on growth strategy, but are you sure that with an aging and decreasing population, it is still possible to expect growth, especially with a strategy which often referred to the past?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for your question. This is I think, fair question to ask. And as was illustrated in some of the slides, making use of the technology or digital technologies, we could come up with new solutions to the social problems. And probably, Japan is ahead in terms of the social problems that many countries in the world, may face toward the future. And aging population or declining birth rate and so forth are emerging as a real, issues in many other, especially OECD countries. So, as I mentioned, how could new, innovations and technologies could address, those issues, and how we could establish new collaboration with the private sector is the key. So the carbon neutral would not be achieved without a partnership with the private sector, or this addressing, the aging of population and the challenges facing in the countryside in Japan is also could turn into a new, growth areas. So of course, we need to keep on trying, and we need to innovate ourselves. But this is one of the focus of discussion taking place at the Kante or Prime Minister's office in these days with the private sector, the experts, and corporate leaders. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very final question actually is about Germany. And of course, recently the Chancellor Scholz paid his visit to Tokyo. And then also Germany is hosting the G7 summit soon in Germany. And maybe against the backdrop, I have a question from Mr. Lars Nikolaisen, the German press agency journalist. His question goes as follows. How important is the relationship with Germany? How does the administration of Prime Minister Kishida want to further strengthen it?
So as you are aware, Chancellor Scholz chose Japan as the first Asian country for him to visit. And so we regard this choice as a manifestation of a very close Japan-Germany relationship. And so we are, strategic partners sharing universal values. And of course, as a presidency of G7, Germany is hosting a G7 summit meeting in late June. And of next year, Japan will be the presidency. So we wish to keep close cooperation and coordination so that to this year and next year would be, would produce positive results in terms of the unity of G7. And given what's been happening, as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, if you look at the number of the teleconferences among leaders as well as foreign ministers, it's really, a vibrant, process. Some could compare with the UN Security Council. So we are of the view that the G7 process is all the more important, and especially as what we found during the Chancellor Scholz's visit to Japan is that Germany is keenly interested in involving more in the Indo-Pacific area, and we signed a bilateral agreement on the security of information. And we have started the 2+2, foreign and defense ministers meeting and port call by German Navy frigates in Japan and so forth. So we regard, Germany as a very, important, vital partner for our promoting free and open Indo-Pacific. And of course, Germany, given geographical, location, we are expecting that the G7 to be hosted by Germany would entail lots of discussion about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which Prime Minister Kishida is on board in supporting the unity among the G7 members.
Thank you very much. Now, it is time to conclude the Trade Hybrid Press Briefing. Just a few additional messages to online listeners. First, to Vietnamese news agency, Mr. Dao Tang Tun. I'm sorry I couldn't pick up your question, but in a nutshell, you asked Japan-US relations. And how does Japan expect from President Biden's visit to Japan? I think the question was already asked by other journalists. And then to that, I think Shikata-san gave his answer. So I hope you understand this situation. Then to Ronaldo Amaral of Brazilian Embassy in Tokyo, also Emil Derinot's Tekin of Turkish Embassy in Tokyo. I'm sorry, because of time constraint, we couldn't really pick up your questions. This is primarily for the journalists, foreign journalists. So, but anyway, I hope you also understand this condition. So with this, Shikata-san, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule and even spent more than 1 hour to talk on the top priority issues of the Kishida administration. And I would like to also thank all the audience who have participated in today's briefing. And thank you all and have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.